Final hour on this Friday, Dan and the Danettes, Dan Patrick Show. The Hall of Famer Dick Vitale will join us. Awesome, baby. People always would ask me, is Dickie V really like that? And I said, no, he's not. When he was on the air, when the red light came on, Dickie V knew how to be Dickie V. But then when he wasn't on the air, he was very quiet. He was able to tap into Howie Schwab, Stump the Schwab, and Howie was, the most knowledgeable sports guy I've ever been around. And Dick would be able to ask Howie questions about certain teams, certain players, and if Howie didn't know it, which was rare, then he would certainly find that information for Dickie V. But, when you think about, and I don't want to do Mount Rushmore, but I just want to talk about the growth of ESPN back in the 80s. It starts with Chris Berman. Because what Berman was doing, it was different than your local sportscaster. Because if you're old enough to remember a sportscaster, the guy who was there Monday through Friday or the weekends, they might get 3 or 4, 5 minutes at the most to deliver the local sports. This was national. And this was a half-hour show or an hour show and doing all of the highlights. We got to do all of the highlights of all the games. And then Chris dropped the hammer with all of those nicknames. It just never been done before. Now, the person I would probably bring up who was a similar type local personality was Warner Wolf in New York City, because Warner had a style, and let's go to the videotape. And I think that he was really important. There are a lot of great local sportscasters, and I don't mean to diminish that role, but once cable sports came along, it did diminish that role, because you really had to go local, because ESPN was carrying everything national and showing those highlights. And Chris was there. Ted Turner used to have a poster, I was cable before cable was cool. And this is when Ted started WTBS and, Channel 17. And Chris was cool before cable was cool when it came to sportscasting. And then you had Dick Vitale. And just those two personalities, that was huge for ESPN, because getting college basketball is what put ESPN on the map. They got the Big East, that put them on the map. Big Monday was big. And then you had, Chris Berman doing the highlights. And there were a lot of other talented people there, but Chris was he was a larger than life personality there. And Dickie V has carried and continued that passion of loving college basketball. That's what he's known for. He just signed a 2-year extension. So great admiration for what Dick has meant to the sport, and also the millions and millions of dollars he's helped raise for the V Foundation. Yes, Paul.
Dick Vitale began at ESPN in 1979. It was the first year they had college basketball rights. Vitale called ESPN's first ever NCAA basketball game that was broadcast. Wisconsin at DePaul, December 5th, 1979.
And this is when ESPN used to have the early rounds of March Madness, and Bob Lee was the host with Dickie V, and Bob was so good at landing planes, because that's what it is, where you're going from one game to the next and going from that game out to some other location. And Bob was just, so good at doing that and played well off Dick Vitale. And Dickie V had the catchphrases, PT Peer, awesome baby. But having Chris Berman and Dickie V, that's why I wanted to go there. It was 24-hour sports. And I was working at CNN at the time, and we were just a sports department in an all-news network. And I thought, that's where I want to be. And to be able to do those highlights, my first show was with Chris, to be around Dickie V. So I was very, very fortunate in my 18 years there that they were there as well. Yeah, McLovin.
I actually just looked up a list of non-hosts who had an impact on sports. There were some good ones. Mel Kiper is a big one.
Yes.
Peter Gammons, big one. Yep. They list Tim Kirchin as one, and they go through Mortensen, like all those guys sort of. Obviously those aren't Mount Rushmore type guys, but there are a lot of contributors who weren't everyday people, right?
Well, we were trying to get established. We wanted the networks, we wanted the TV critics, the media to recognize us in what we were doing. And for a long time, I think ESPN struggled to get noticed. We had a strong following, but it was a smaller following. It was kind of almost a fraternal type feel. But those who were loyal were extremely loyal. We just wanted to be viewed as more than just highlight guys or you're on that cable show. And then, they eventually, it didn't matter whether they were going to recognize us or not. They had to deal with us because ESPN was, going to blow everybody else away. But Mel Kiper, what he was doing when he was doing it, and he was doing something different. And ESPN back then wasn't afraid to do something different. And when you think about the draft analysis, Mel Kiper created that. Yes, McLovin.
I feel like Peter Gammons is the original insider for all sports. I know.
I know there were other
Will
ones. McDonough is one of the first insiders because he was Boston Globe football writer, Sean McDonough's dad, and he would do NBC's pregame show, and then he would have inside information. And Peter Gammon, Boston Globe, that sports section, that Sunday sports section, that was heaven. Because you were reading something you weren't getting other places, whether it was baseball, football. So I had Bob Ryan, Peter Gammons, and Will McDonough. Baseball, football, basketball. Yes, McLovin.
All the SI writers, too. Lee Montville, I think DeFord.
Yes.
Maybe not DeFord, but Lee Montville was a big writer there.
Yeah. But Peter was an insider, and we treated him as such. That, Peter would get information, and, we would set him up, and he'd knock it out of the park. And same with Dickie V. Dickie V got information as well, became an insider of sorts. But we'll talk to Dickie V, and I'm happy for him. Hope he's healthy and happy where he's signing a 2-year extension.